শুভেচ্ছা দর্শক, আমন্ত্রণ জানাচ্ছি চ্যানেল 24 এর নিয়মিত আয়োজন প্ল্যানেটারি হেলথ একাডেমিয়া সুরক্ষায় প্রতিদিন অনুষ্ঠানে পাওয়ার বেনিফিটেড হসপিটাল। দর্শক, এই অনুষ্ঠানটি আমরা বহু বছর ধরে করছি এবং এখানে আমরা বিভিন্ন বিজ্ঞানীকে, গবেষক, চিকিৎসক অনেকে আমন্ত্রণ জানিয়েছি, কিন্তু আজকে যারা আমাদের সাথে যুক্ত হয়েছেন তাদের মতে এত শক্তিশালী একটি প্যানেল কখনোই আমাদের সাথে যুক্ত হননি। আমাদের সাথে 4 জন বিজ্ঞানী যুক্ত হয়েছেন যারা অক্সফোর্ড থেকে বাংলাদেশে এসেছেন এবং বাংলাদেশে আমাদের বিজ্ঞানের গবেষণা, আমাদের পরবর্তীতে যে স্বাস্থ্য সংকট তৈরি হতে যাচ্ছে সেই সংক্রান্ত গবেষণায় তারা কাজ করবেন। তারা বাংলাদেশে বিভিন্ন স্টেক হোল্ডার যারা আছে তাদের সাথে কথা বলেছেন এবং ভবিষ্যতে কিভাবে বাংলাদেশের স্বাস্থ্য ব্যবস্থা, স্বাস্থ্য অবকাঠামোকে উন্নয়ন করা যায় সে বিষয়ে তাদের মতামত দিয়েছেন। আমরা আজকে অত্যন্ত আনন্দিত এবং গর্বিত তাদেরকে পেয়ে। আমরা পরিচয় করিয়ে দিচ্ছি তাদের সাথে, আপনারা অনেকেই তাদেরকে চিনবেন কারণ সাম্প্রতিক যে কোভিড মহামারী আমরা অতিক্রম করেছি সেই সময়ে যাদেরকে আমরা কোভিড মহামারী অতিক্রমকালে হিরো হিসেবে পেয়েছি তারা আজকে আমাদের সাথে আছেন। আমি পরিচয় করিয়ে দিচ্ছি, আমার বাম পাশে আছেন প্রফেসর স্যার পিটার হরবি। Sir Peter Horby is the Director of Pandemic Sciences Institute, University of Oxford. He is also Executive Director, International Severe Acute Respiratory and Emerging Infection Consortium, ISARIC. Professor Sir Peter Horby, welcome to our program.
Thank you, Mr.
Amar bam pashe at my left side, I have very young scientist, Dr. Zakir Hassan. Dr. Zakir Hassan is DPhil researcher in clinical medicine, Nuffield Department of Medicine, University of Oxford. He is a Clarendon Scholar and the first Oxford Moe Foundation DPhil Scholar. Dr. Zakir Hassan, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
At my right side, I have Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert. Professor Sarah Gilbert এর নাম সারা পৃথিবীতে আমরা জানি। She is world famous because of her contributions for COVID vaccine development. She is with us. Professor Sarah Gilbert also holds Said Professorship of Vaccinology, University of Oxford, and she is also affiliated with Pandemic Sciences Institute of University of Oxford. Professor Sarah Gilbert, welcome to our program.
Thank you very much.
We have got Professor Piero Oliero. He is Professor of Poverty-Related Infectious Diseases, Nuffield Department of Medicine, University of Oxford. Professor Oliero, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
So the topic that we are going to discuss is decentralization of scientific capacity and our preparedness for the future pandemic. So we are going through a pandemic. It's COVID pandemic, which is not over yet, but we will talk about the future crisis that we are going to face and also the level of capacity building that we need to face those crises. I want to start with Peter Horby, with you. What's your view about the current status of COVID crisis? Is it over, or we have decided to move forward with the crisis with us?
Well, we're in different stages in different parts of the world. It's clear that the relationship between the human population and the virus population is still evolving. We're still seeing new variants evolving in different countries at different places, and we've seen recently that China has released its control policies to some extent, which was inevitable, and they are now suffering some of the disease burden that other countries have seen. And so I think countries will at different stages reach a point of endemicity where we live with the virus. But to be honest, I think that will take another year or two with some bumps in the tower when we may see new variants emerging. So we're not out of the woods yet.
Okay. With that comment in mind, Professor Sarah Gilbert, you led the research in Oxford to develop the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines, which helped so many people around the globe. So as Peter Horby was saying that we are not out of the woods yet, so we are carrying the crisis. What's your view about the vaccines that we are using now? Is it going to be enough, or we need to improve our vaccines as we are going through with the crisis forward?
Well, what's really changed is the percentage of the world's population that's been vaccinated, and particularly in here in Bangladesh, that's a very high percentage, which is a really great achievement. And when we look at the immune response to the vaccination, we see that it improves with each dose of vaccine that people get. So it improves after their second dose, then again after their third, again after their fourth, and it becomes better at recognising the new variants, even though we're using the same vaccine multiple times, or the vaccine against the original strain. And those vaccines seem to be doing very well to control at least severe disease in the population. So we're probably not going to be seeing very much change in the vaccines now.
A lot of people have questions that is it useful to use the same vaccine again? So it's very reassuring to hear from you that it's still useful, so we should take the further doses when it's recommended?
We're still seeing very good control with the original vaccines, and if you're recommended to receive a vaccine, you should have it. Not everybody will continue having doses of vaccines. It'll probably just be the older population who need to have future booster doses.
Okay. Professor Piero Oliero, the title that you hold in Oxford is extremely interesting. You have Professor of Poverty-Related Infectious Diseases. So it means that the countries which are relatively poor and have, we'd say, like lower level of health infrastructures, you are studying some of the crises that they are facing. But from your experience, as the COVID crisis is still going on, and the countries which have, as I said, not very much prepared with their health infrastructure, what's your opinion about those countries? Are they doing good, or they also need to enhance their capacity to face the ongoing crisis and also the future crisis? What are the modifications that they can do?
Right. So, in the first place, I'd like to say that poverty-related infectious diseases is not confined to low-income countries. So they are spread across the globe, and they affect also sections of populations that impoverished people, populations in different countries, also in more affluent countries. So it's not restricted to low and middle income countries. And then, as far as preparedness is concerned, I think we all have to improve in terms of our capacity to capacity to prepare and to react to epidemics, and this applies to both to lower income and higher income countries. So there's a lot of work to be done everywhere.
Everywhere. I want to come to Dr. Zakir Hassan, but before that, I think Professor Peter Horvey, connecting with Professor Oliero, I think it's important to recognize the uniqueness of the crisis that we faced during COVID. The world is so connected that the crisis in underdeveloped or developing countries is not confined there. It is spreading like wildfire all over the world. So with that lesson in mind, with COVID, for future pandemics or future infectious crises that we are going to face, what type of modifications or what type of preparedness is very much necessary for us, you think, in your own opinion?
So I think we learned a lot of lessons from the pandemic. The first is that these are not theoretical threats, they're very real threats. People have been warning about epidemic threats since SARS-1, but memories are very short, and after SARS-1, after 1 or 2 years of preparedness, people relaxed. But we've seen that we should not have relaxed. We got another coronavirus similar to the first SARS, and it was devastating. You know, we've lost millions of lives. We've had untold sort of suffering from families with losses, but also long COVID, and we've had billions of economic losses. So these are huge threats. They're real threats, and we will have another pandemic, and we really have to take it seriously and prepare properly. And that needs investment. I think the second big lesson is that science made a big difference. Science really was transformative. We saw the lateral flow devices, developed through science in partnership with manufacturing, were transformative, that people could test at home and they could isolate at home and we could test easily. We saw the vaccines, which Sarah and others developed, have saved millions of lives and have meant we can all get back to normal lives. We've seen clinical trials produce treatments like steroids and the antivirals and the monoclonal antibodies developed by scientists in partnership with industry that have, again, saved millions of lives. And we've seen digital disease control tools, we've seen mathematical modelling. Science has really had a huge impact in getting us out of the pandemic, saving lives and getting us back into normal life. And so, I think it's really important that we build on those lessons and that we improve the innovation that we saw during the pandemic. During the pandemic, we saw vaccines in a year, we saw new therapeutics in 9 months. That was unheard of previously, and we've shown we can do it, and so we should be planning to be able to do that for the next threats. And investing in young scientists, like Dr. Jakul and others, so that wherever these things occur and whoever's affected, that next time we can respond much better.
Thank you, Professor Peter Horby. And obviously, on this ground, we want to come to Dr. Zakir Hassan, to you. We're talking about future preparedness, and obviously we have to include future generations of scientists, and you are representing the future generations of scientists. In your views, you are working in Oxford, you came from Bangladesh, and you know the ground reality here, and it can be replicated in other countries too. We can say that other lower middle income countries have probably similar health infrastructures. Keeping those things in mind, and also your Oxford background, what's your view about the future preparations that the young generations can take, and how they can contribute to the preparedness for the future crisis that we're going to face?
Thank you very much. As Peter was mentioning, preparedness is key for respond to pandemic threat that has been we have seen in COVID-19 pandemic as well. Like in low and middle income countries, there are not enough trained epidemiologists, trained scientists in different backgrounds, laboratory scientists, also immunologists, vaccinologists, and we think that the same we have experienced during COVID-19 pandemic when we are responding here in Bangladesh. We have viruses circulating that pandemic threats. For example, Nipah virus with a high case fatality rate over 70%, the avian influenza virus, which is we have been detected frequently in birds, and a country where we have frequent animal-human interaction. So I believe the training the next generation scientists to be very important to play a key role in responding to future threats.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Zakir Hassan. In that connections, Professor Piero, I want to come to you as the training for the future generation, especially in these countries, developing countries. It's very important because they probably will be the first people who will recognize the threats in the beginning. So from your experience, your work experience in different countries, in what areas you think that we need to invest in the beginning, or we need development in the first place if we want to really enhance the capacity in these countries?
Right, so this would be at different levels, and of course it's got to be tailored according to the capacities in different countries. There would be that on the one side you have the science and strengthening the science, and on the other hand you have the health systems. Without a good, robust health system, whichever new intervention you've got cannot be delivered efficiently. So these two things, they go hand in hand. And of course, and so this is one thing. The other thing is that we must pay more attention to the local epidemics, the local outbreaks that may be just in one country or few countries, affecting a relatively small number of people, relatively small in terms of market, and therefore they products for these diseases are not appealing. So these are not there's not business case for these diseases. Nipah being one example, but we just had another example, monkeypox, which used to be confined to a small area of Central and Western Africa, and then all of a sudden you have an outbreak everywhere in the world. So if we invest in capacities in these countries, then the countries will be able to deal with their own problems and early enough, and this will not only solve the problems of the country, but being selfish, even the high-income countries should be happy, because then that doesn't become a pandemic.
Yes, exactly. We really look forward to that kind of collaborations between developing and developed countries, because it's beneficial for the whole world in the way we described it. Professor Gilbert, we sometimes are very surprised and very happily surprised that the vaccine came so fast in our hand, and obviously I congratulate you and your team and also other vaccinologists who work around the world. But people have questions, so why and how it was possible for us to get that vaccine that fast, because as Professor Horby said, it didn't happen in the beginning, before, in the history of humankind. So in your own opinion, in your own words, how was it possible to get that vaccine that fast?
Well, what's changed is that for the first time, we were preparing to make a vaccine very quickly. We were developing a technology that would allow us to very quickly make a vaccine against a new virus when we found out what it was going to be. That hasn't been the approach that's been taken in the past. Vaccines used to be developed by taking the virus itself and then eventually, slowly, over a long period of time, turning it into a vaccine. And with each vaccine that was made, the process would be different and the period of time would be different. It was very unpredictable. Now we have what we call platform technologies, and they are technologies that we can use to make lots of different vaccines. And we spend a lot of time understanding the technology and how to use it. And that means most of the work is done before we even know what the new virus is. So we can then go very quickly. We had been preparing to do this. And as soon as I heard about the new virus outbreak, I was thinking about how we could use our technology to go as quickly as possible.
Okay, so with that background and that platform in our hand, do you think the future pandemic that we are talking about, or we are expecting probably coming in next few years or few decades, is this enough? Or if we need upgradations, what type of upgradations you think we need to think about at this stage?
Well, there are different phases to being able to get to the point where we can vaccinate large numbers of the population. First of all, we have to produce the first batches of the vaccine and test them in clinical trials to see if they actually do protect against the virus that we're trying to protect people against. But once that's happened and the regulators have approved the vaccine and said that it should be used to vaccinate people, we then need very large numbers of doses if we're going to vaccinate the population of the world. And so the vaccine manufacturing has to speed up as well. What happened in 2020 was that vaccine manufacturing had to be created from almost zero capacity to very, very high capacity, and that was happening in parallel with the clinical trials to test the vaccine. But it still took a bit longer to enhance the vaccine manufacturing capacity and make sure that we could produce enough vaccine for everybody to use. Now that that's been done in 2020, I would hope that the next time we can really cut down the period of time it takes to go from having an approved vaccine to having large numbers of doses of that vaccine so that lots of people can be vaccinated quickly. Okay,
thank you, Professor Gilbert. We really hope that your hope becomes translated all over the world. And with that, Sir Peter Horby, the vaccine making capacity is not homogeneously distributed around the world. Some of the countries are very prepared and they have all the capacities to make the vaccines. Countries like us, we don't have the vaccine making capacities, especially like the new vaccines that are coming. So in that aspect, countries like us, like low or middle income countries, in your own opinion, how we can prepare or how we can be benefited from collaborations with developed countries to make our own system develop so that we can also make large doses of vaccines when it's needed. What's your view about this?
So I talked about some lessons from the pandemic. I think another lesson is the persistent inequity that we see in the world. There was an imbalance in the research that was done. Nearly all of the clinical trials for therapeutics and vaccines, many of them were done in high-income countries, very little done in low-income countries, and almost none in the lowest-income countries. And we saw an inequity in access to drugs and access to vaccines. And so at the Pandemic Sciences Institute, that's one of our sort of key principles, is that we want to try and use our influence and our expertise to try and address that inequity and try and redress that imbalance. And so, we're very pleased to be in Bangladesh and working with ICDDRB, which is a very famous and well-known institute in the world, and also the Institute of Epidemiology, Disease Control and Research at the Ministry of Health, to see how we can partner together. Because improving the capabilities in all countries, including low-income countries, is a global health benefit. It benefits everybody. It's in everyone's interests. And so we should be partnering together in an equal partnership to make sure that countries have the ability to do their own research, solve their own problems, develop their own therapeutics and their own vaccines. And on the vaccines front, that work is going ahead, and I know that Sarah has been meeting with vaccine potential vaccine manufacturers in Bangladesh, and there's technology transfer as well. So I think we need to take that lesson, and I'm seeing positive, movement in the right direction, but I think we need to really invest in those partnerships.
In that aspect, Dr. Zakul Hassan, from your experience in Oxford, also Bangladeshi background, if we really want to make good progress in those areas, vaccine development or other new drug developments that will help us to face future health crises, the young generation's involvement is very important, their research, their preparedness for this. So what will be your message to our youngsters, how they can get involved with this movement and how we all can be benefited from their involvement?
I would say the first thing that the young generation need to keep in mind that I have seen that very brilliant, bright minds from LMICs like us, they go overseas, train in some of the best institutes in the world, but they don't come back. And I think for us, what would be important, you are trained with some of the best scientists in the world. I'm pleased to be able to join the Pandemic Sciences Institute. I hope to be trained and will come back and will work to improve the science here, and also engage to train the next generation of scientists to strengthen our the emerging infection program that I work with, so that we can build local capacities, because we know the context very well. We have been dealing with this disease ourselves, and also we had good connection with the local institute, so we can leverage all those and to progress a lot in terms of making new vaccines, therapeutics, collaborating with some of the global institute.
Yeah, that's very good way forward, and we really hope that we will really get benefited from those kind of approaches. Professor Piero Oliero, in that regard, some of the diseases that we have here, for example, dengue, it was a disease that we only faced during a certain season, and now it is we are still facing the problem of dengue, which is really very atypical. So with this kind of diseases, and also because of the climate change, some of the spread have changed. So in that aspect, what's your views? How we can effectively collaborate with, for example, Oxford Pandemic Sciences Institutes or other research institutes, and connect here in Bangladeshi institutes and make really good progress to research on those diseases and face those crises?
As you said, the profile of infectious diseases is changing. It's changing also as a consequence of climate changes, and diseases like dengue, like you said, but also other the so-called arboviral diseases like chikungunya, Zika are being found in wider areas for longer periods, and in places where they were not seen before. And they are becoming a constant threat. They would be popping up in different places in the world. So dengue is a typical example of a disease that now is essentially seen everywhere. And so are some of the other similar diseases. This is because the vectors have expanded the area where they can survive. So typically this is a global problem, and that requires a global approach, where we certainly what's required is a collaborative approach across different countries, different continents. And then there will be the diseases that are more local. So we cited Nipah. There was an excellent example in this country, which is visceral leishmaniasis, also called the Kalajar, that essentially has been eliminated as a public health problem, thanks to a huge effort, political will, support, and of course the expertise in the country, but also the collaboration between the researchers and the control program. I think I've been fortunate enough to be working with scientists and the control program in this country for more than 10 years. And the achievements here have been fantastic. So this is for me is an example where with political will, with of course advances in science and ready to use tools and expertise locally, then you can achieve a lot.
Thank you, and we really hope that crisis like dengue, it becomes addressed as soon as possible, because it looks like it's really taking a really deadly turn here in Bangladesh. It was terrible this year, and we are really afraid for the future years that we're going to face. Professor Gilbert, we need to, we're very encouraged that you are also working on Nipah virus, and I saw your recent papers, the success with the Nipah virus vaccine, initial success that you have shared through the papers. So you are using the same platform, if I understood from the paper.
We are using the same platform, which means again that we can save time and we can save costs in developing a vaccine against Nipah virus. The early work that you referred to was just some testing in animal studies, and the vaccine looks very promising. And now we're at the point where we're manufacturing the vaccine ready to go into clinical trials. So those clinical trials will be starting. We'll be able to look at the immune responses that are made in people when they're vaccinated. And I'm very keen to come to Bangladesh to continue those clinical trials once we've got our first data, because Bangladesh is the country that has the most cases of Nipah virus, and it's the country that therefore most needs the vaccine, and we should be testing the vaccine in the population here.
We're really looking forward to that progress. Very happy that you have already found one solution for Nipah virus, because it also becomes a public talking point time to time here in Bangladesh. So congratulations and thanks for working on that. It's another example that crises like this, which is acute here, need to be addressed, and leading institutes like Oxford can work on those and find solutions. Yes. Thank you for that. Professor Peter Horvey, the Pandemic Sciences Institute in Oxford. It's a very unique institute, and we know that Oxford comes with lots of innovative ideas, and they lead some of the major breakthroughs in health science and also in other sciences. But this was a very surprising move. Suddenly we found that Pandemic Science Institute in Oxford there, and we are very happy to see that. So what was the philosophy behind this, and why do you think that it was necessary, and what are the future plans, visions for Oxford Science?
Well, thank you for asking. So big universities like the University of Oxford have a lot of capabilities, and we have capabilities from very basic science, structural biology, pathogen biology, through to the production of products like new therapeutics, new vaccines, but also then we have public health, and we have social behavioural scientists as well. And often those people work in silos, in scientific silos, but the pandemic was a real opportunity to bring everyone together with a common goal, and it was incredibly powerful. For the first time, many of us in this big university sat down together and said, right, together, what can we contribute to this global health problem? And we saw that actually the Oxford University had an enormous impact. We had the biggest clinical trials, we had the biggest clinical database, we had the biggest policy tracker, we had one of the major vaccines in the world, particularly a vaccine that was affordable and was highly used in low-income countries. And we saw that we accelerated all of this at breakneck speed. And we said, well, we need to do this every day. If we can do this in 18 months, let's try and do it all of the time. And so, together some of the key scientists got together and we lobbied the university and said we want to create an institute where we do this, and we make this extraordinary effort the ordinary kind of performance that we expect. And the university was very supportive and helped us create this institute. So I think what's unique about it is it brings together huge expertise of people who've got real experience in responding to epidemics. We really can do this. We've done it for COVID, but we've all worked in the past. Sarah's worked on MERS, we've worked on SARS-1, we've worked on plague, we've worked on Lassa fever, we've worked on Ebola. We have great international partnerships, you know, and we're building a new partnership here in Bangladesh with ICDDRB, but there's also been long-term partnerships in Bangladesh around other vaccines like typhoid vaccine. You know, we have, I think, the financial backing and the partnerships that we need to make a difference. And so we see the Pandemic Sciences Institute as a global asset, not just as a university institute. So we're really welcoming partnerships from around the world.
Thank you, and really we appreciate the initiatives from Oxford University, and thanks for leading the institute and giving us hope to meet the future challenges. We're at the end of the program. We really appreciate your time. You were absolutely exhausted. You did so many activities here in Bangladesh, but you gave us time, and we're really grateful. But before we finish, I think it's also, we're talking about the next pandemic or next health crisis. I want to ask the same questions to everyone. So in your view, Professor Peter Horby, what is going to be the next pandemic? What organ it's going to involve, and what will be the nature of that crisis?
So yeah, never make predictions is something that I've told myself, because if you think, you know, would anyone have predicted Zika virus? You know, a vector-borne infection that's causing congenital brain abnormalities in children. No one would have predicted that. So I think the key message is that there are a lot of viruses out there, and expect the unexpected. Nevertheless, yeah, there are still some big threats out there. We've got other coronaviruses, but I think we should still keep our eye on the old enemy, influenza. Okay. There's a lot of, you know, influenza viruses in animals that are novel and could spread to humans and cause another influenza pandemic.
Okay, we have to really keep our eyes on influenza. Dr. Zakir, same questions to you. You will face it in the future, so.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with Peter, and to my opinion, most of the pathogen pandemic threat has originated from zoonotic sources, coming from animals. And I would say, of course, there are pathogens over there, but we also need to look at countries where there's you know, a frequent interaction of animal and human interactions, where there is possibility of you know, spillover of pathogen from animal to humans, and those are the pathogen that might, you know,
still be problematic for us. Professor Sarah Gilbert, we will looking for the solutions from you, but do you know the enemy that we're going to face next?
Well, although we don't know what will necessarily be the next pandemic, we know that there always will be another influenza pandemic. It may take a little time. The intervals between influenza pandemics are variable, but there is always going to be another influenza pandemic because there are so many influenza viruses that exist in bird populations around the world, occasionally spill over into domestic poultry, and that's when humans start to get exposed and get infected, and we can see the start of an outbreak which may become a pandemic. So we really need to keep a very close eye on avian influenza and not be too relaxed about cases that are happening. There are many other zoonotic viruses as well, and we need to know what's happening with all of those in different parts of the world so that we can be ready and to see if there are any new viruses emerging, and if those viruses are very similar to viruses that we already have vaccines for, that helps us understand the best way to go about quickly making a vaccine against those new viruses as well.
Okay, it really again emphasizes on the importance of the decentralizations and monitoring around the world what's happening, and then like institutes like Pandemic Sciences Institutes in Oxford, these are the institutes that can gather this knowledge and then work on those threats that we are going to face. Professor Peter, earlier, same questions. Do you have anything new to add in the list?
So it's good to come last because I can say I agree with
all
the others. Maybe just to add one additional element, just going back to what I said earlier on. Of course, there are all the unknowns, but there are some knowns. And amongst the knowns, again, I'm insisting on the fact that there are outbreaks that may be limited in the geographical spread, number of people that have been affected, but they are there, and they keep coming back. Nipah being one, Lassa fever, just to cite other examples, even plague, which is still present in parts of the world. Actually, the potential for plague to be spread is everywhere in the world. So we've got to pay attention to those. We've got to deal with these smaller chronic outbreaks where they occur, and solve the problem there, so that we are prepared. Not only we can solve the problem there, but we can be better prepared should a spillover occur, and for some reason these diseases to spread more broadly.
Thank you, Professor Piolero. And obviously, from all of your comments, we can still see the respiratory infections, or the threat is still bigger than anything else. But what came above everything is the surveillance, the collaborations, and the connectivity, and we can emphasize on those, enhance those capacity, and prepare us for facing those future crises. We're really grateful to all of you for giving your time. Dr. Zakir Hassan for coordinating this effort. You really played the role of the catalyst to bring all of them together. Really, our heartfelt thanks to you. Professor Peter Horby, we're looking forward to the further collaborations with all the institutions that you have visited. Professor Sarah Gilbert, we're very hopeful that the Nipah virus vaccine will come very soon, and the Bangladesh will be very welcoming for you to collaborate. And Professor Pierre Oliero, the diseases that you're working with, dengue or other infectious diseases, it's very acute here in Bangladesh, and we really hope that your research will contribute here too. And obviously Bangladesh will be very open and ready to help you or collaborate with you if anywhere it's needed. So thank you everyone, and we look forward to meet you again if time and opportunities permit in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
দর্শক, শেষ করতে যাচ্ছি আজকের সুরক্ষায় প্রতিদিনের বিশেষ আয়োজন। আমরা লম্বা সময় ধরে কথা বলেছি, আমাদের যারা গেস্ট প্যানেলে ছিলেন তাদেরকে আপনারা চিনেছেন। পৃথিবী বিখ্যাত ওয়ার্ল্ড ফেমাস সায়েন্টিস্ট ভিজিটিং বাংলাদেশ and working on issues related to Bangladesh, which will be translated around the globe. আমরা সবাই তাদের কাছে কৃতজ্ঞ যে তারা এই সময়টা আমাদেরকে দিয়েছেন, এবং তাদের কথা থেকে একটি বার্তা আমরা নিতে পারি। আমরা একটি প্যান্ডেমিকের মধ্যে দিয়ে যাচ্ছি, কোভিড-19 ইটস নট ওভার ইয়েট, এটা শেষ হয়ে যায়নি, কিন্তু আমাদের এর মধ্যেই প্রস্তুতি নিতে হচ্ছে সামনে যে সংকট আসবে সেটা মোকাবেলার। এবং সেখানে তাদের সবার কথার একটি সুর ছিল, আমরা প্রত্যেকে যার যার জায়গা থেকে আমাদের সাধ্যের মধ্যে যে কাজটুকু করছি সেটিকে একসাথে করে পারস্পরিক সমন্বয়ের মাধ্যমে আমরা ফিউচার যেই ক্রাইসিস আসছে, যেই প্যান্ডেমিক হোক অথবা অন্য হেলথ ক্রাইসিস হোক, আমরা সেটাকে একসাথে মোকাবেলা করতে পারি। আমরা সেই আশাবাদ ব্যক্ত রেখে এবং সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ জানিয়ে আমরা আজকের মতো শেষ করছি সুরক্ষায় প্রতিদিনের বিশেষ আয়োজন। আপনাদের সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ এবং আপনাদের সুস্বাস্থ্য কামনা করছি। থ্যাঙ্কস টু এভরি ওয়ান অফ ইউ।